with the FNCC and the CSN, has been involved in at least 2 campaigns in support of the public broadcaster, the most recent in 2016. This campaign was a great public success in Quebec and Moncton, where no fewer than 12,000 people responded to the organizers' invitation and marched through the streets of Montreal. A series of shows were held across the province and in Moncton, demonstrating the popular attachment to CBC Radio-Canada. CBC Radio-Canada is an essential project in the North American environment. For Francophones who are and always will be a minority at risk of disappearing, it is the privileged tool to exist. Radio-Canada is the main medium through which Francophones across the country can see, hear, talk, debate each other, and develop a sense of belonging to a cohesive yet fragmented community. For the English-speaking community, CBC is an essential tool for supporting and promoting a Canadian identity. CBC Radio-Canada is the first step towards understanding regional, national, and international realities from a Canadian perspective. Not only does it deserve to be protected, but the government must ensure its development and growth. The current media crisis is primarily a financial crisis. CBC Radio-Canada's business model protects it in part from this turmoil, but not enough. The National Forum on the Media could be an opportunity to reiterate the government's commitment to the public broadcaster. It must not only guarantee its independence in terms of content, but also financially. The one is inseparable from the other. You can't have a relevant, independent public broadcaster without sufficient, stable, recurrent funding. The turmoil affecting the media is not sparing public broadcasters. The announcement of 800 job losses jeopardizes its ability to fulfill its mandate, especially in French-speaking communities. We need to maintain a network of stations in every province and territory with the resources and staff necessary to offer Canadians solid, verified information. The credibility of a medium like CBC Radio-Canada is its main trademark, but its credibility is fragile, and it's being undermined by the onslaught of fake news. CBC Radio-Canada is not a project that can be evaluated simply in accounting terms. It's more than ratings. It's a collective project to better know and understand ourselves and the world we live in. It's a component that contributes to the vitality of our democracy. More than ever, I am, you are, we are CBC Radio-Canada. Thank you.
Monsieur Tousignon. I now go to Unifor. I understand, Ms. Payne, that you are speaking for the group. So for 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. It really is a pleasure to join with all of you today, and I would like to thank my fellow witnesses for their excellent opening remarks. Our union represents more than 10,000 media workers across the country in broadcast television, radio, newspapers, digital, and film production. And I can tell you, they are dedicated and passionate about their work, tough and principled. They care about the important role they play in our democracy, in telling stories, in holding the powerful to account, in making sure we have the information as Canadians that we need every day to make the decisions that we have to make in our lives. They understand their responsibility. But our members face a number of very tough realities at the moment. You've heard it here. A media sector in crisis, widespread job loss, the destruction of local news in so many places across Canada, harassment and violence on the job, and a concerted effort by some in the political class to erode trust in journalism itself. Their integrity called into question as they are accused of all kinds of things, including the latest, being a tax-funded mouthpiece for the PMO. I'd like to provide some context on the state of local news in Canada at the moment. In just the last 14 months, the media sector has undergone a brutal list of cuts and closures. Post Media, 11% of its editorial staff. BCE, 1,300 jobs, including closing radio stations last year. North Star Capital, eliminated 2/3 of Metroland's workforce, converting more than 70 weekly papers to digital only. And just this month, Chorus Global cut more jobs. And just last week, BCE announced the layoff of 4,800 employees in both telco and media, including 800 uniform members. On the media side, the cuts included all but one noon-hour newscast in Toronto and weekend newscasts in most major markets across the country, as if the news stops at Friday at 5 p.m. BCE also killed W5, the longest-running investigative news program in Canada. Apparently, we are told it will be replaced with reruns of the American comedy The Big Bang Theory. I don't have time to list all the cuts because we'd be here all week. It's almost impossible to measure the impact this is having on local communities where so-called news deserts are leaving Canadians, especially those living in small towns and rural areas, without access to meaningful, relevant local news. Canadian telecommunications and media companies have a responsibility that is bigger than to shareholders. They have a responsibility to Canadians and to Canada and to journalism. Fact-based journalism matters, and the truth, as you've heard, has never been more important. Fake news has infested the fabric of our society, sowing distrust in the media, in government, in institutions. And in the middle of that chaos, we need the media to tell our stories, to uncover truth, to hold the powerful to account. We understand that no single piece of legislation, fund, or subsidy will be enough to solve this crisis. But there are things we can do. We can renew and expand the Local Journalism Initiative, a program that supports the creation of original civic journalism in underrepresented communities across Canada. It's slated to expire in April. There's also the Canadian Journalism Tax Credit, which was recently extended and expanded in the fall economic statement, an important move that Unifor called for and supported. Governments, both federal and provincial, can earmark bigger portions of their advertising budgets for local news, local TV, radio, and newspaper, and, as you've just heard, Canadian digital media. Now, a few words on the other crisis: increased harassment and violence. Employers, workers, and their unions, including Unifor, journalism schools,
You have 9
governments,
seconds. Can you
and even members
wrap
of
up?
the public
You can expand.
all have a role to play, as do political leaders, Madam Chair. In closing, I stress that the layoffs, downsizing, and closures that I've highlighted today cannot continue if we actually want to have local news in this country. And to conclude, journalists deserve to work harassment-free, no matter where that work is, online, covering a protest in downtown Ottawa, or even in the foyer of the House of Commons. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You can expand on some of that when you get into the question and answer section. Thank you. And finally, we now go to the question and answer section. And this begins with a first round of questions from all the parties here, and it's a 6-minute round. I want to stress the 6-minute round includes the question and answer, so please be absolutely as terse as you can in your answers. Maybe not terse, but as short as you can in your answers. I don't want you being terse. Thank you. So I begin with the Conservatives, and we start with Rachel Thomas. Ms. Thomas, 6 minutes, please.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Gonez. Mr. Gonez, you started out serving in the legacy media. You then left that. You've started something on your own. It's been very successful. You're digitally based. I believe you've hired 10 employees, if I read correctly. Obviously, diversity is something very important to you. clearly you have an audience, and so you've gained the trust of the Canadian public. Kudos to you. Your company seems to be going in the opposite direction of legacy media. And yet, this government made the determination to go ahead with Bill C-18, even though they knew that it was supposedly for the benefit of legacy media and to the detriment of digital providers such as yourself. I should say digital media providers such as yourself. You just made a statement that because of the legislation, Bill C-18, that your revenue has gone down by 40%. That's a pretty big cut. And obviously what that represents is not just a financial cut to your company, but also it means that Canadians aren't being able to access the news that they want to access, which is, of course, to their detriment. My question for you is this. Clearly, Bill C-18 didn't work, isn't working. And so going forward, what is the answer in order to make sure that Canadians have access to quality news, to independent journalism, in a sustained fashion going forward?
Thank you for the question. I understand the intent of C-18. As we're all hearing, obviously, the crisis that's unfolding, and of course, we don't want to lose any more journalism in this country. And if any way to sustain that is a good thing, I always believe in an expanded industry is a better industry, because the more stories that are being told, the better for all of us. It's just unfortunate, though, that with the implementation of this bill, one of the largest tech giants who own two of the biggest social platforms that each and every one of us in this room use, we are no longer on those platforms. So what is on those platforms? And if the mission was to stop and try to slow down the amount of disinformation out there, it's only gotten worse, because the trustworthy folks are no longer on there. And for me, when I look at this, I say, thank goodness Google didn't walk away from the table, or else all of us would have been effed. And I don't mean to use that lightly, but it is the truth. What I do want to say, though, is that thank goodness Google did stay at the table, and I truly hope that Meta comes to their senses and comes back to the table. But if there are new funds coming into the ecosystem, I truly hope everybody in this room will advocate that the people who took a risk to create innovation in this country will have a specific stream allotted to them where they can access some of those funds so they can continue to do the amazing work that we're doing. And I also hope that everybody in this room will advocate for racialized owners of media in this country to also have access to a specific stream so that we can continue to do the fine work and the hard work that we're doing to tell the stories that we've been left out of. And I want everybody to understand that even before this crisis was unfolding, we had problems in the legacy sector. We had problems with diversity. We had problems with the diversity of storytelling. That's not to diminish the hard work of our everyday journalists across this country, but we have to acknowledge the gaps that needed to be filled. And people like me took a risk and said, you know what, I'm going to leave this legacy sector and try to take a risk to fill those gaps. And we were doing a darn good job. And it really is unfortunate, because I believe if this block didn't happen, we probably would be about 50% bigger than we were before this block happened. And so I'm just asking that, as we can't go back in time. The bill is here, and I'm a realist, but what we can do is try to, again, make people whole who have been affected, and also try to foster an ecosystem where we can see other players like GMI emerge across this country. In places like BC, in places like Saskatchewan, in provinces who do suffer from news deserts, and also hopefully have less impact to what's happening in the legacy sector. I just don't want digital first voices to be left out of the conversation, because we have been severely impacted the most from all of what's been transpiring.
Left, Ms. Thomas?
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Shields?
Thank you. We've heard a lot about trust. I'm sensing from what you're saying, you had trust in what you were building. Legacy media has lost the trust. We heard a number of 13% of Canadians trust legacy media. What did you do different? What does digital do different that builds that trust?
Well, the trust lost in legacy media is very complex, and it's a layered thing of why that has happened. There have, of course, been political attacks against legacy, the media industry, which is not